Welcome to the 77th edition of the Cairo Climate Talks. And today we have the great pleasure to discuss the correlation between heat and climate change with our most esteemed panelists, who you can already see here on the screen. Chances are that if you are in Cairo, or even if you're not in Cairo, you are experiencing this heat right now firsthand. Or if you're lucky, you have an AC and you are cooled down by it. And both of these things are going to be very relevant for today's discussions. For those of you who are attending the Cairo Climate Talks for the first time, Cairo Climate Talks are a monthly event series, and we bring together experts from academia, from the civil society, from policy advising boards. We bring together people from private sector as well to discuss different themes of climate change. For example, as today, heat, but we've also talked about water before, about public health, and new technologies such as green hydrogen. So if you are interested to know more about Cairo Climate Talks, or if you want to listen to former Cairo Climate Talks, please check out our YouTube channel, as we upload all of our events there, and we'll also upload this event there. The Cairo Climate Talks have been around for 10 years this year, and they're an initiative of the German Embassy in Cairo and the Egyptian Ministry of Environment. And both of them are represented today here and are going to open this event with short remarks. So I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Philippe Mouppet, who is the head of the science department at the German Embassy in Cairo, to the virtual stage to open on behalf of the embassy. Please go ahead, Philippe.
Thank you very much, dear Lily. Thank you very much for opening this event with us today and for moderating. Dear Dr. Ezad Lewis, head of the Ozone Unit at the Ministry of Environment, distinguished panelists, dear Cairo Climate Talkers. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 77th edition of the Cairo Climate Talks, where we will focus on climate change and heat. And I'm sure that all of you, or at least those of you who are in Egypt, understand why we have chosen this topic for our last CCT before the summer break. The heat is on. In Egypt, the average summer temperatures have increased by 0.31 degrees centigrade per decade since 1960. And people here are noticing many more summer days with over 40 degrees than there used to be. In Germany, average temperatures has also been rapidly rising in the last decades, with several extreme heat waves hitting our country and the rest of Europe in the recent past, causing the death of tens of thousands of people. Even more recently, large parts of Germany and its neighboring countries suffered from devastating floods, which unfortunately also cost many people their lives and made thousands lose their homes and livelihoods. While at first glance, these floods were not directly connected to high temperatures, there seems to be a probable link between rising temperatures and other extreme weather events like this. So it is clear that we all need to act urgently on these issues, both by continuing on the mitigation track to reduce emissions, but also on the adaptation track. Different local communities have historically used different means to adapt to heat, from buildings that protect from the heat to delaying work hours to the cooler evenings. Since the middle of the last century, air conditioning units have become more widespread. While they offer easy ways to cool rooms, these units also consume a lot of energy and have led many people to actually forget about traditional ways of keeping cool. Nowadays, new ways of cooling and adapting to the rising heat are being developed. And I'm very happy that we have with us today such an expert panel to discuss these issues. In this context, I would like also to highlight that Germany, through its Ministry of Environment, is working on a multi-year project about scaling up sustainable cooling in the Middle East with its partner ministries in Egypt, as well as Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, with our side supporting the project with almost 20 million euros for its entire duration. And I think that Dr. Mohammed will be able to tell us more about this project and what it means in the Egyptian context. I would like to thank him and all of our panelists, Dr. Zainab, Dr. Marwa, and Dr. Heba, for joining us here today for this very important discussion. And I'm particularly grateful that Dr. Ezad is here today to present the view of the Egyptian Ministry of Environment. Thank you, Dr. Ezad, and also please give our highest regard to Her Excellency, the Minister, Dr. Yasmin Fouad, who has been continuously supporting our CCTs. Thank you very much. My thanks also go out to Lily, our CCT coordinator, for moderating this event, and to our audience for joining us today. Last but not least, I would like to say a very special thank you and unfortunately also farewell to our other coordinator, Amina, who was key in organizing this and many more CCTs in the last 4 years. Thank you, Amina, for your great work and to your dedication to the Cairo Climate Talks and to our team. Even though we're very sad to let you go, I can say that we're all very proud that you have been accepted to the prestigious Chevening program to continue your studies in the United Kingdom. So congratulations on this achievement. We're happy to see that you're moving on to great future plans. Thank you very much for your excellent work for CCT. So now, without further ado, I will leave the floor to Dr. Azad for his opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. Distinguished representative, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to address you this evening for the start of the 77th Cairo Climate Talk titled, "The Heat is On, Climate Change and Heat." Over the last decade, Cairo Climate Talk has mobilized the local community around the climate issue. Climate scientists have clearly concluded that human activities have contributed to an increase in global temperature over the last century. The observed climate change, marked by 0.75 degrees Celsius increase in average surface temperature globally over the past century. This altering the frequency and intensity of weather and the climate extremes, such as floods, droughts, heat waves, and sandstorms. Climate scientists predict that such extremes will continue to increase in frequency and intensity. This trend affects all people, but especially in developing and climate vulnerable countries. Changing regional and local temperature and precipitation trends likewise have a widespread impact on economic development. To help all regions adapt to the changing climate, the global community must come together to develop and disseminate the climate information and predictions based on the best available science. Mitigation of emissions, greenhouse gases, and the elimination uses of ozone depleting substance are essential to reduce the heating effects and prevent more warming. Egypt's national determined contribution has defined a number of targets to face climate change, which are divided into adaptation action packages and mitigation actions to reduce greenhouse gases emission. The National Ozone Unit has also successfully reduced the annual consumption and the emissions of ozone depleting substance, which are potent greenhouse gases that contribute to the radiative forcing of climate change. However, adaptation measures to combat the heat and its effect on welfare are key to achieving an equitable climate strategy. Ozone and climate protection is a global challenge. Is a global challenge that needs a global solution. The strengths of our partnership to address the global climate issue gives us a unique opportunity to adapt to the already occurring impacts of climate variability and change, while planning and preparing for future changes. Investing now in climate information and predictions is the best way to ensure that our generation and future generations have the ability to manage the risk and realize the opportunities associated with climate variability and change. Egyptian Ministry of Environment, as the national leader in the field of climate information, is grateful for the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Natural Conservation, and Nuclear Safety, and also for the German Embassy in Cairo. Before concluding, I would like to thank coordinator, speakers, and the moderator of this event, and I'm very pleased to see you present today. Thank you all for attending the 77th Cairo Climate Talk, and I look forward to fruitful deliberation. See you, Lily.
Thank you so much, Dr. Azad, and thank you so much, Philippe, also for these opening remarks. For those who have just joined us now, if you want to listen to the Arabic translation, please click on the globe button that you see at the bottom of the page and switch to the German channel for Arabic translation. Amina, if you could once again translate that very quickly for me, that would be lovely.
مساء النور جميعا وأهلا بكل اللي انضموا جديد. لو عايزين تسمعوا الترجمة العربي ممكن تدوسوا على الزرار اللي عليه كوكب تحت وتختاروا القناة اللي عليها اللغة الألمانية، هتلاقوا عليها الترجمة العربي. شكرا.
Thank you so much. And also for everyone, if you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A box below so we can answer your questions at the end of the event. And now, without further ado, we'd like to dive into the topic of heat for today. Heat is one of the most notable effects of climate change. Not only can we feel it directly on our bodies most of the time, but we can also see it directly with our own eyes. We can see changes in our environment, increasing droughts, increasing desertification. We see wildfires and decrease in water and loss in biodiversity. Only this summer, a lot of pictures have been flickering over our phone screens, which tell a story of very, very hot summers, increased fires, and even melting ceiling fans. So it is really getting hot. It is unfortunately also one of these effects that are much worse than what we've expected partly. So even though scientists have warned us of the global warming, the record temperatures of this year show us that maybe what we can expect even exceeds their fears. But we have a lot of great experts here today who are all working in their own rights on trying to combat the increased heating and to measure the effects that the heat and the increased heat have on our planet. So I'm happy to introduce very briefly our panelists for today, starting with Professor Heba Khalil. Thank you so much for joining us. Professor Heba is a professor of sustainable urbanism at the Department of Architecture at the Faculty of Engineering in Cairo University. And she is the senior coordinator of the Architectural Engineering and Technology AET program. She teaches and conducts research in community development, informal areas, urban climate, and integrated urban systems, and has more than 30 publications, on these topics. Secondly, Professor Dr. Mohammed Salhin. He is the founder and CEO of the Integrated Development Group, IDG, an integrated engineering firm with over 25 years of experience in the field and an in-house research and development department working on environmental planning and building topics. He is also a professor of integrated planning and design and the co-founder and director of the Integrated Urbanism Sustainable Design at Ain Shams University. He's also joining us today as the national representative of the Cool Up project that Philippe has mentioned in the beginning in his opening remarks. Dr. Marwa Dabeh is joining us from Sweden, I believe. I'm not sure if you're there right now or if you're just located there.
Yes, I'm Sweden now.
Perfect. And Dr. Marwa is an architect and biogeometry practitioner. Her expertise is in sustainable and environmentally conscious architecture. And she's worked extensively in the field of zero emissions and passive earth buildings, sustainable architectural conservation, climate responsive design, climate neutral architectural design, and she is a licensed architect. She is currently a docent and associate professor in Malmö University in Sweden. And Dr. Zainab Salah is joining us from Cairo. She is a researcher at the Egyptian Meteorological Authority, where she worked in the Numerical Weather Prediction Center and is currently in the Air Pollution Department. Her research interests are aerosols and greenhouse gas effects on the climate, aerosol clouds interactions, climate modeling, development of dust forecasts, moisture sources, drought, and dispersion models. She has worked on various research projects and publications, among others on integrated environmental health impact assessments and advanced observation and modeling technologies. Thank you so much, all of us, for joining us today. And I would very much like to start with Dr. Zainab Salah. And it's going to be maybe a little bit of a long question, but I would kind of ask you to give us a bit of a background on what is the role of the Egyptian Meteorological Authority and what is the development on heat that you are seeing and predicting in the Egyptian context.
Okay, thank you, Lily. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about the Egyptian Meteorological Authority and our work. Okay. I will start with the work in Egyptian Meteorological Authority, how we can make the weather forecast. But in the beginning, I will introduce Egyptian Meteorological Authority, or EMA, as we say. EMA is established to be the responsible for providing all meteorological services in Egypt through its large network of meteorological stations covering approximately all the regions in Egypt to monitor the meteorological elements such as temperature, pressure, wind, humidity, solar radiation, and also air quality for remotely places. We measure the background air pollution and the greenhouse gases. Also, we issue reports for short, medium, and long-range weather forecast, and reports for marine and air quality. EMA, as member of World Meteorological Organization, has a regional training center certified by WMO for African and Arabic countries to train the meteorologists in the Arabic and African countries. In EMA, we have a department of scientific research. This department is responsible for the research in the topics of meteorology, agrometeorology, and hydrometeorology, and climate change over Egypt, besides the studies about the solar radiation total column ozone, and background of air pollution and greenhouse gases. Our studies based on the measurements and numerical modeling. We have in EMA, we have good operational infrastructure for numerical weather predictions for weather and climate. We use these models for daily weather forecast and studies of climate change. Then I will these briefly summary for our work, our in EMA. But then I will talk about how we can issue the weather forecast, the daily weather forecast every day, based on the current observations and also the numerical weather prediction. We can predict the next days if we have heat waves or heavy precipitation or something like this. Okay, I talk about the okay, these answer, or I missing something? I missed something.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. No, this is perfect. I think it's great for us to know how the heat has developed in Egypt. Like what is the situation at the moment in Egypt with heat?
Okay, in Egypt to forecast these days, to know what the forecast of the next days, we use numerical models. These models based on using the current measurements from the surrounding areas, and also using the meteorological, the numerical weather predictions. We how we define the heat waves through the long record of measurements of meteorological elements as temperature, rainfall, air pressure, humidity. We have long range record. So we calculate the normal and average for more than 30 years ago. Based on these data, we calculate the average or the normals, climate normals, and then use these climate normals to say today is the temperature is more than the normal or below than the normal. So using the numerical models, we say today, for example, today temperature is 40 degree. For Cairo, it's 40 is more than the normals. Normal of Cairo is 35 degree. This is the average of July during 30 years ago. So by this way, we define these days the heat is abnormal or no. And based on the definition of WMO, the heat waves is a 5 or more consecutive days with the maximum temperature exceeds the climate normal. And this climate normal, according to every country. The climate normal of Egypt is different than the other countries. So if we have many consecutive days with maximum temperature exceed the normal by 5 or more degree, so we can say these days, these 5 days or these 3 days is heat wave. So during the current situation we have in the last week, we have heat spells. It's not heat wave, but it's very hot days, and also because of the high humidity, this can make the temperature to be more and discomfortable. So, but this condition is normal for Egypt because we are in the summer. and is these are normal for the summer. In the summer, Egypt is affected by the Indian monsoon, and these Indian monsoon uh, associated with warm air masses come from India and China, and then by passage of these air masses over the Arabian Peninsula, temperature increases, and because of these air masses passing over the water bodies such as the Mediterranean, the air gain more water vapor and become more humid. So these conditions in Egypt is normal, but the temperature increases during maybe 1 week, but the other week temperature returns to the normal and then again. So I hope this is enough answer.
Perfect. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Zainab. I feel sometimes we forget how hot it gets in summer, and then we're surprised every year anew how hot it actually gets. But it's actually great that you've also mentioned that the last days have been very humid, because one of the things that also helps us with humidity is, of course, air conditioning, which cools us down and also makes sure that our rooms don't get as humid. Now, there was a recent Guardian article in which Stephen Burani said that the problem that we're facing is the loop, that the warmer it gets, the more we use ACs, and the more we use ACs, then the warmer it gets. So, of course, we're interested to know, how do we get out of this loop? How do we get out of this trap? And I think, Dr. Mohammed Salihin, maybe you can give us some insights on this, specifically with the Cool Up project that you're working on.
Thank you, Lily, for the intro, and thanks also to Dr. Sahir for the intro about the climate and what we should be expecting in the coming few years. The Cool Up projects, which we are presenting in Egypt, is a 6-year project funded by the German Ministry of Environment, BMU, under the EKI initiative, and in a consortium led by Guidehouse, and also has UNDP, Eco-Recherche, Franco School of Economics, ECRI, and we as IDG. And of course, our governmental partner is WEAA and the Ministry of Environment in Egypt. The project itself acknowledges, or actually emerges from a previously first phase of another project called Build Me, working on energy efficiency in buildings, in which we identified, of course, cooling or energy demand for cooling as one of the major contributors to energy use, and also its, of course, negative impact on the other side on the environment. And in this project, which actually runs also in parallel in 4 countries in the MENA, so it runs parallelly in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. Works mainly on certain lines. One, reducing cooling demand. And when we talk about cooling demand, we're talking not only about energy needed for cooling, but also the need for cooling. So we acknowledge that there is a big value for passive design that would ultimately result in less need for cooling. However, if we still need cooling because of any excessive heat or special circumstances, that the cooling system that we use should be environmentally sensitive when it comes to energy efficiency, the refrigerants being used and their impact on the environment, and the gases, the type of gas that we use. So that's in brief what's a Cool Me project is on. And it focuses on 3 lines of intervention. So together with WEAA and the Ministry of Environment, we work with the governmental sector on policy assessment and policy reform, and we try to help WEAA to introduce, and other environmental, other national agencies working on this track of policies to develop new policies, new directions, new guidelines to help the market and the society, the industry, and the end users to adopt more environmental sensitive, environmental friendly cooling systems. On another track, we're also working with the technology. So we're working with the industry, we're checking what their current challenges, and we look at that not only from a technology point of view, but also from an economic point of view. There is a competition there, and we need to acknowledge that there is a market, but we're trying to introduce the component into the market, and by that we also introduce that industry to that global market. Last but not least, we're looking at the key factor of promoting environmental measures, which is finance. So we work with banks in order to see what are the challenges facing finance of these environmental measures, how we can make it easier for industries and for even end users to get access to these environmentally and sustainable solutions in cooling. And these are the three tracks. On the side of how we do that, we have policy and stakeholder platform dialogues in which we cooperate with all of the partners involved in these three lines. And we also have training and capacity building track embedded in the project, works at the level of banks and level of architects and developers, and the level even of technicians and people working in the industry. And last but not least, because we know that great part of the need for adopting these policies is the public awareness. We have a work package dedicated solely on dissemination and having this regional networking and developing a sense of the need and demand for that. So that's in brief the project. I hope I made it brief enough to allow for further discussions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think you've mentioned something very important, right? We can't just stop using ACs. We have to acknowledge that spaces are heating up and that this is going to be rather a bigger need in the future than a smaller. And I think this is a great point to bring Dr. Heba in also, because urban spaces are experiencing a special kind of heat, and they contribute also in their own ways. And so maybe you could give us a short insight into how heat matters in your work and in the urban spaces you work on, and maybe also explain some of the big words like urban metabolism and urban microclimate to make it a bit more understandable for people.
Okay. Thank you, Lily, for the introduction, and I appreciate the comments of the previous panelists. That makes my life easier to come in this place. So to start with, like what Dr. Zainab was talking about, the EMA, what the temperature to make this, I mean, to make it more comprehensible to everyone, the temperature that the EMA announces. So when you hear about the temperature in the news that today Cairo is 40 degrees or today is 38, this is one number probably from the weather station, which is, I think it is in the airport, and you have one at the EMA, and I think the one that is, they announced the results are from the one in the airport. But the reality in different parts of the city is very different. Like if you live in Cairo and you have different neighborhoods with different structures, what we mean by structure is that the density is different, the number of buildings, the height of buildings, the width of streets, the vegetation, the existence of any landscapes. If you have a water body, if you are beside the Nile, if you are more towards the rural areas, so you are on the outskirts of Cairo, are you living in a very dense area like Shobra, for instance, or even Muhandisin now with all the asphalt roads, the buildings with low albedo material. We call it low albedo is how much heat do they absorb. So if you have a thermometer and you can try to measure the temperature in such areas, you'd find that the temperature is very different in different parts of the city. And the concept that the scientists used for that is called an urban heat island. An urban heat island is when you have an increase in temperature inside the city, inside the core of the city, specifically because of the how the buildings are, the height of the buildings, again, the materials. Do you have any landscape, vegetation or not? Or do you have a water body? So Cairenes, they know this, I mean, naturally. You know that if you want to experience a breeze of air, you just go to the Nile. So either you take a felucca in the Nile, or you just stand on the bridge across any one of the bridges crossing the Nile River. This is the only part inside the city that you can enjoy a breeze. And why is that? Because the Nile, alhamdulillah, it runs from north to east, north to south. And this is the wind prevailing, the better or the preferred wind prevailing in Egypt coming from the north. So you catch the breeze. You catch the breeze coming through the Nile when you stand on the bridge. And that's why it is very popular for everyone to stand on the bridge and in hot summer nights. So you have the urban heat island. That's a very important concept if you want to mitigate or if you want to change how the city is suffering from heat stress. There is climate change, of course, globally, but for each city or for each urban area suffers differently from increased heat stress. And this is why the concept called urban microclimate. So the microclimate could be, and it's not a difference of 1 to 2 degrees, it could be goes up to 7 and 8 degrees. And if you're driving a car and you have a thermometer in your car, and you're driving on the ring road or moving from Zamalek, for instance, to even to 6th of October or to Tajamma al-Khamis, the 5th district on the other side, you'll feel your car will measure this difference as you go around the city. So this is one thing to take into consideration. What are the kind of areas are we building or are we planning first as urban planners? And then what kind of buildings are we planning as architects? These are two interrelated concepts. Some of my work, I try to understand this microclimate and what are the measures that could be taken by individuals or by architects, if you are building designers or renovating buildings, to make the microclimate better or to improve the microclimate. This is one concept. The other concept you asked me about, the urban metabolism. As the urban metabolism is how the resources flow through different cities. We consider cities like a living organism. We as humans, we consume inputs, we eat food, and then we go to the toilet. We have also excrete heat. So there are outputs, inputs, and then there are certain processes inside our bodies to give us energy so we can move and work and so forth. And there are outputs. If you look at the city with the similar concept, then the city, in order to perform the different functions, to provide housing, to provide infrastructure, to provide services like schools, any kind of retail, any use you have, there are certain inputs and certain outputs. So if you want to, it's like a living organism. If you want to make the cities more eco-friendly or more resource efficient, you have to see how these resources flow through these areas. So if we take one example, for instance, the water coming into your tap at your house comes, of course, we are specifically in Egypt, comes from the Nile. So the water comes from the Nile into the water treatment facility. The water, it is being tested. Sometimes they put chlorine and so forth, and then it goes into the pipe system, and then it reaches up your apartment. You use the water, and then it goes into the sink again, the gray water or the black water. So if you have the two pipe system, so and then this water comes down into back to the sewage, then goes to the water treatment facility, the sewage water treatment facility, and then could end up into the Nile again, or probably it ends up into the Nile again, but after being treated. Or sometimes it can be, if we are more conscious, then we reuse this water into other uses, like we can have plantation with using this treated water into as irrigation instead of using clean water from the beginning. So this is the concept of trying to follow this resource cycle. And I like the explanation Dr. Salhin was giving for the Cool-Up project, that it tries to tackle all the cycle of the project, all the cycle of the cooling system, in terms of not only one thing, that let's look at policies, but also looking at the finance, looking at the awareness, looking at different stakeholders' opinions. And I think this is also a very important thing. Some of my work into looking at the different stakeholders is that you want to bring this to the attention of even the simple person on the street. If you talk to anyone on the street and ask them, do you know what climate change is? Are you suffering from climate change? They wouldn't understand what you're talking about. But if you ask them, are you suffering from heat? Do you think today is hotter than last week? Or do you feel that summers are becoming more hot? They would say yes. They would start interacting with you, understand, relating to the ideas. I have to I had to install ACs, or I work a lot in informal areas, so we have more fans now. We have to use more shading. We water the street. This is a common practice we do, that we water the street in order to use the evaporative cooling effect, specifically during dry days. Of course, if we have humidity now, that this wouldn't work much, but at least we use the water to bring the dust down. We are in a dust city. Of course, we are in the middle of this desert. We just seem to forget that Cairo is the biggest arid city in the world. So we are in the middle of the desert. Yes, we have the Nile, but we are in the middle of the desert. So this is, we have dust, we have increased heat, and so forth. And these are the, I get very much interested in how people adapt and how can we make this more on a bigger scale. I hope I answered your question.
You did perfectly. Thank you so much. And I really like this image of the organism, to make it clear, you know, to see it holistically rather than just one single aspect of it. And thank you. You also mentioned something else that I think can lead us over to Dr. Marwa quite well. The idea of different parts of the city having different climates, and of course also different parts of the world have different climates. And I think ACs have kind of allowed architects to ignore that, to ignore the environment in which houses are built, and basically just use the same exact design that they would use in Beverly Hills in the US, also in Beverly Hills in 6th of October. So Dr. Marwa, could you give us some insights also on what would it mean to build environmentally conscious, and what is the correlation between heat and architecture that you see and that maybe you would recommend instead?
Yeah, thanks, Lee, for the interesting questions, and thanks for all the previous panelists for their really informative answers as well to your really interesting questions. There is, of course, a connection between how we design our buildings and the local environment where we design them in. One of the biggest mistakes the majority of the architects do, as you mentioned nicely, that we just have like one single model that we can copy and paste and put it in wherever we would like to construct a building. Especially like office buildings is becoming common now in Egypt. We have this curtain wall structure. So we design and construct, I call them elephant buildings. It's just like a greenhouse that we put in the middle of the desert. So we put people in saunas to melt, not to have kind of a habitable place to live or to work. And of course, we increased the heating demand, and we, of course, had to install air conditioning systems to make it habitable, make it possible to be inside those big elephant greenhouse buildings. And it is a kind of a lazy solution, because the air conditioning is just like switch on and switch off. So you can accommodate the interior space to your comfort levels just by a click with your remote control for the AC. And of course, it's centralized even air conditioning systems. And it made also our bodies more acquainted to this like cold temperature, and we get the shock every time we get out. And it's becoming more and more higher threshold for our comfort levels Imagine it's 40 degrees outside and you want it all the time to be 20. And if someone tells you, no, 22 or 24, no, it's 20. It's not. Sometimes, and even in Gulf areas, they make it 18, which is crazy. Like this huge difference in temperature also affects our bodies, affect our activities all the time. So we move from like air-conditioned building to air-conditioned car to air-conditioned office, air-conditioned mall. So we move in this kind of air-conditioned bubbles, and we are disconnected to the environment around us. And here comes the issue of this climate conscious designs. We need to be aware and conscious of the surrounding climate around us. Is it hot, arid, or is it hot, dry? Like hot, arid, of course, like hot, dry, or hot, humid, or it is mild. Like we need to understand first the climate. In Egypt, we have more than 7 climatic zones. We cannot say like all of Egypt, the majority of the land is hot, arid, but we have also different kind of specificities of climate zones in Egypt. If we design something by as Dr. Heba said, close by to the River Nile is different than we design something in the oasis in the middle of the desert. It's different than if you design a building by the Mediterranean or even close to the Sudanese borders and so on, or by the Red Sea. So it is different from one zone in Egypt to another. So being conscious, being aware of what are the climate specificities, as also Dr. Zainab kindly mentioned, like all these kind of climate parameters with the temperature, solar radiation, with the precipitation, humidity, air temperature, all these kind of things help you to design the right building in the right place. And to be able to cope with all these kind of increase in or gradual increase in temperature, you need to equip your buildings with you could say it simply like with weapons to defeat all this kind of increase in climate change symptoms or like threats. It has to start with actually on the urban level. If you look at the urban structure of old towns and cities, even like we call them the traditional towns and cities, or even before the vernacular ones, the design of the neighborhood itself and the city, of course, on a larger scale, help the building to perform even better. And why now when we go and visit traditional houses, why they don't perform as before? Because the surrounding context is different than before. We don't allow air to move in our cities as it used to be before. We build now by the borders of the Nile, like high towers that block the air to the rest of the city. Like as Dr. Heba nicely mentioned it, the Nile is actually the lung for the whole country, and especially for Cairo with its hot and dry climate. So we prevent the whole city to breathe by this kind of blocking like the front side of the Nile and not allowing the air to move properly to even down part in the city. So it has to start with on a bigger scale and then on a micro scale on the building level. So providing the building with like shading devices, provide the proper orientation, provide the building with proper passive cooling and heating solutions. And it's not only heat, it's also like cold. Like in winter time, we also experience more cold days compared to previous years. And it starts also to snow. In some years we have started to notice like days we have a snowfall in Cairo. So yeah, this is how I can like briefly answer the issue related to climate conscious design, to be aware of your climate context and to design according to the climate parameters in the area you're in.
Perfect, thank you so much. And I think also Dr. Mohammed Salhin, this is also your area of expertise, right? And you've very greatly described how Cool Up or Cool Me is actually tackling a lot of issues. Maybe you could give us a little bit of insights also. What is your experience in Egypt with implementing these solutions?
Well, I need here to jump between the two projects that we work together with our partners Guidehouse, and both are still financed by the same sponsor. So I will not be in any way breaching between two territories. It's the same. So as I mentioned, we started with the project Build Me, and the one that we have Build Me 2 now. We're working on finalizing that, and we're now working on Cool Up. It used to be called Cool Me, but it's now rebranded as Cool Up. Sorry if I missed the term from time to time. I did not yet get used to the new term. It's a Cool Up. From the Build Me project, we identified cooling as one of the major energy component in building and construction. And within that, because we also did not only work with policy or governmental agencies or regulator, but also with developers, end users, and so on, we identified that for buildings to be built with that energy responsible design, there is a little bit of an extra cost that you need to add to that if you had the same design kind of. And to compensate for that extra, the end user should see a result. And because of the massive construction, end users would need some kind of a recognition by authorities that this building performs as per that promised. And it, on the long-term operation-wise, it will save that amount of energy, and consequently, that would save them quite some good amount of money. And we are working in parallel to our project now with authorities to try to work to get something like a labeling approach for buildings, exactly what you have like labeling for appliances, for ACs, for refrigerators. People, when they see a governmental agency certifying a building of performing that good, they would then be willing to pay that extra that would save energy. I would leave the side of the passive design and the conscious design aside, because I think Dr. Marwa Dabayah will possibly shed more light on that. I will focus more on what we do in Cool Up then. In cases in which you need cooling, we in our project, we work on, first of all, supporting the phase down of hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs gases, which are harming the ozone layer. We're also working with authorities, working with industry to replace and safely dispose old and inefficient cooling appliances, and bringing into the technology, not like inventing, but introducing within the ecosystem of industry, the idea and the business model that would encourage factories, industries to adopt these, and the market to adopt, and the end user to use. So it's a whole chain that would end up at the end that when you have that efficient AC at home, you're forced to have one, so you need to have an efficient one. You would have somebody who would be able to maintain it. So that's a whole cycle we're trying to work on, coupled also with the issue of finance, if there is an extra finance that needs to be supported by the banks. That's a situation that we're trying to support on the Egyptian side. We're trying to support the implementation of the Kigali Amendment and Paris Agreement. And we think we're actually getting support from all of the agencies that we work with, WEAA, HPRC, everybody is really keen. We at the Cool Up project, we act as a platform in which these agencies come together, discuss, we discuss with the industries, and we also investigate opinions from the market. So that's in a nutshell what we do, how we enhance the cooling business when it comes to the energy efficiency, and also minimize their negative impact on the environment. So these are the two sides of the Cool Up project. I hope I answered your question, Lily.
You did, yes, thank you so much. And speaking of the environmental effects that we see as a consequence of trying to cool down, Dr. Zainab, I would also be interested to hear about the assessments that you have worked on how these different pollutants actually already affect people's health, and also lead to, and lead to other extreme weather events that you are measuring?
Okay. For other extreme weather event, we in EMA we operate numerical models for climate studies of the projected climate change over Egypt based on the IPCC emission scenarios. So and we work to update these the result of the numerical models using the new data and using different data from different global models. So according to the first results from this projected scenario, the temperature in Egypt is expected to increase, and associated with this increases the number of days with maximum temperature, for example, exceeds 35 degree will increases, and the minimum temperature, the days with hot days or heat waves will increase. These projected according to the emission scenarios. And also the minimum temperatures will increase over all cities in Egypt, especially, but we can notice these increasing in the northern coastal cities as Alexandria, Matruh, but in the upper Egypt, maybe the difference between now and next years is not very noticeable, because the temperature already in the upper Egypt is higher than normal, than the north of Egypt. So also we can expect, for example, as you say, the drought or heavy precipitation. Uh, we can see many years without increase in the precipitation, but maybe after that we can see 1 year with heavy precipitation, as we see in the last year in 2020, in March 2020, we have so heavy precipitation. These extreme event also in the coastal areas. For example, in Alexandria, we see heavy precipitation days, maybe more than the last years. Also, we can expect extreme event as dust storm. Okay, dust storm is normal phenomena in the spring in Egypt. Also in autumn, in September, we can see more. We can see dust storm, but is less than the spring. Okay. I hope that I answer your question. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I forgot. I talk about the air pollution. Yes, air pollution, and related the air pollution with the extreme event. Okay. Yes. Yes. You ask about that. Okay. According to the mission scenarios or the IPCC emission scenarios, the air pollution and especially greenhouse gases trap the heat, so increase the temperature. So by increasing the air pollution and the greenhouse gases, all these things can increase the temperature, not only in Egypt. It's greenhouse gases is global for all the globe. Okay, I hope I answered your question. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, you have very much. So thank you, Dr. Zainab. And I'm very glad you're mentioning also the different aspects of climate change, that they like the effects that they have on the city and the places. And Dr. Heba, you're working in the informal settlements a lot, and a lot of times these are the areas in which people are more vulnerable to all of these changes, as Dr. Marwa has said, lower temperatures, as well as the dust storms, like Dr. Zainab has mentioned. And you're working on inclusive and sustainable development within these informal settlements. Could you maybe give us an idea of what that means?
Okay, so if we start by saying that Cairo is mostly informal, so this is not something that is of smaller groups are suffering from a certain thing. This is 60, we say the studies say 60 to 70% of the city is informal, and thus this becomes a center focus and not just on something on the side. And if we are trying to achieve the SDGs, specifically SDG 11, making our cities more inclusive and sustainable, then looking at the climate responsiveness in such areas, in informal areas specifically, it becomes very important. These areas were constructed by people themselves, so they don't have a pre-plan. They were not planned, and hence they suffer from lack of green spaces. They suffer from actually lack of open spaces. All the open spaces over there are just the streets. We did conducted a research, it was a German Egyptian research project funded by both governments, and in our work we worked in Imbaba. So Imbaba district is one of the biggest considered it is an informal area, but now it is part of the formal city, of course. And we found, we did a lot of investigation in terms of measurements. We did measurements ourselves with the different equipments, the temperature, the humidity, the wind direction, and so forth. We also did extensive surveys with people, the perception of people, how they perceive heat in different times of the day and how they respond to that, and whether they avoid going onto the streets in different times of the day, or they plant a tree, or they use shading, or they water the street, as I mentioned before. Or we also ask them about what kind of interventions are you willing to take care of. So if you plant a tree, are you going to take care of this tree? Who should take care of it? Who should plant, who should water it each day? Who should be responsible of that? If we have a certain installment, a certain installation, kind of a shading for an area, who should be responsible of that? If you have a green roof, so some of the interventions would be to have a green roof on top of the buildings in order to both improve the urban microclimate as well as perhaps provide some kind of a productive green roof. So this would be have an economic benefit as well. So we investigate a lot of the solutions, the worldwide solutions. Would they be adaptable to such areas? In that project, we also collaborated with the governor, actually the Giza vice governor at that time. Now she's the governor of Damietta. And she was very enthusiastic about the idea of looking into climate responsiveness in informal area. It started as I said, as an idea of how to look at in different parts of the city and how to make them more responsive. And interestingly, we found that there are benefits into these areas. If we look at how much heat gain happens inside the buildings because of the compactness, the buildings are very near to each other, and sometimes they only have one facade or one elevation that is exposed to sun, exposed to the sun radiation and so forth. So the buildings, the heat gain inside the buildings is not very high. But the structure of again, the structure of this the whole neighborhood or the whole district, because of the lack of open and green spaces, as well as if you have narrow, very narrow streets that are perpendicular to the wind direction, then you don't have any wind coming into the area. The idea of the ventilation, Dr. Mar was talking also about that. How can you build an area and allow the air to flow through this area, and hence you have improved urban microclimate in such areas. And these in such areas, if you have narrow streets 6 or 7 meters or even 4 meters, and they are perpendicular to the wind direction, then you have no airflow and they have stagnant air. So basically, if in the morning the area heats up, and then in the afternoon or in the evening, supposedly there is a breeze that we call it, it washes away the heat that accumulated during the day. If this cool breeze does not wash the heat during night, then you have accumulated heat and you start a new day with an accumulated heat, and this is apparent in such areas. We tried in our project to make this a focus. We also collaborated with the GIZ in that instance. They had a project that was running in parallel to our project, a climate change component to the PDP, the Participatory Development Program, funded by the GIZ, or I mean, they run by GIZ, but it has funding from Germany as well as funding from the EU. And at that point, we tried to communicate with WEAA, bringing this into the conversation. I think Dr. Aizat at the beginning talked about the INDCs, Egypt's INDCs, or intended national determined contributions. They have adaptation and mitigation measures, but they have no focus on the urban sector at all. All these sectors are more on the coastal zones, the agriculture, some, I mean, there are connections to other zones, but there is no focus on urban areas. And we try to bring this into conversation. We tried also, actually a lot of this was done by the GIZ to bring this, to relate it to the to the health issues. So this was, I mean, 5-6 years ago, before even the COVID and everything, bringing what are the health hazards that come from increased heat. And we collaborated with the Ministry of Health to try to quantify what are the losses, the economic loss that happens when you have people suffering from increased heat. They would fall ill, they will not go to work, and they have economic losses due to heat stress and increased heat stress. And at that point, the conversation changes from just tackling that we are having increased heat, or this is something we should bring into consideration or consider into no, this is something, it is severe, it is has a very economic effect. And I think one of not from the project that I was working on, but this conversation with a lot of stakeholders resulted somehow in we only have one governor that has a strategy for urban adaptation and mitigation, which is the Giza governorate. So we have the INDCs on the national level, but this is not reflected not on the local level or on the city level or to district level, then to think on informal and formal. So we don't have this reflected on the local level in order to have real projects on the ground that would contribute to the improvement of heat responsiveness, whether informal or informal areas, or in planned areas or in unplanned areas. So to start with, we need to have these policies trickle down on the local level, as well as consider this as part of any upgrading project. So also bringing it into the discussion, the ISDF, the Informal Settlement Development Fund, or the Development Facility, as they are mandated to work within all the informal areas and all the unsafe areas. Now we have another project I was working on called the Local Area Development Plan. It was with the Ministry of Housing, the General Organization of Physical Planning. We provide plan strategic planning on local scale, and in these projects we bring in the climate change component, trying to implement or to embed some of these some of the outcomes we had from the research project into the practice, and bringing to this as mainstream, and it becomes part of becoming a more inclusive city, and not only catering for providing ACs for the wealthy, but also people who are not, who actually ACs should be considered. I mean, we should change ACs, or should not advocate for ACs, but also to consider how can we improve the urban climate, the climate responsiveness to the more vulnerable people. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was so much information in your overview. Thank you so much for giving that to us. And I think this is a good point also to lead over to Dr. Marwa, and what I would like to do, because we're running a little bit out of time, to tie in one of the questions that we've gotten also. So we've talked about, you just said we need to, make sure that we're not just building for the rich, we're not just, building for ACs. So Dr. Marwa, maybe you can give us some alternatives, like how would development have to look like to be more sustainable? You've also working a lot on, I think, zero carbon building practices. So maybe you could give us a little bit of insights on how this can be a solution. And this is where I'm trying to bring in the twist. Please feel free to ignore if this doesn't actually fit in here, but we've got a question also about the desert cities. So if there is a way to build in the deserts with zero carbon buildings, then I would be happy to hear about it, but this is on you to decide if this fits.
Yeah, actually, I like the question, especially like also the point in that question related to using like desert cities as a lab for the future, as we are going more into drought and desertification. So I think it's a good question, because if we start now, we might get more even like better solutions to cope with the future, like tough scenarios that we are facing. We are like we'll experience very soon. It's not only for desert cities or for desert climate or for hot climate. It is for majority of climates that we can find like smart, conscious, sustainable solutions to design our buildings and to design, of course, our cities at large. If we look around and we see what kind of building materials that we could use, apart from the heavy industrial materials or energy abusive industrial materials that we use commonly, especially in the residential sector. You can depend mainly on natural materials. You don't need concrete, you don't need steel to construct residential buildings, and those are the majority. We leave the concrete and the steel for like bigger structures and things that we cannot use clay or in some countries wood, or in agricultural countries we can use straw, and even cities that are close to the waterfront we can use reeds. So there are plenty of natural materials that actually our traditional and even before vernacular architecture have given us a lot of good examples that we could learn from to use in our contemporary designs. And there are plenty of research work on international level that shows that we can still rely on natural materials in building construction. At least we will be able to save enormous amount of carbon emissions, especially again in the residential sector. And we all know that the building sector constitutes or is responsible for more than now 40% of all emissions. So if we start with the building sector, we can solve definitely a lot of the climate change extreme events, or we can reduce and mitigate a lot of the climate change extreme events. So to build in a carbon neutral or in a zero carbon way, it starts again with the building material. So if you made a good decision in choosing the building material, and then go to the second level, design decisions, conscious design decisions, and of course adaptive design solutions for the occupants. We sometimes ignore how people adapt in their buildings. We think, okay, we are also, as architects, we are also human beings and we know how we use our buildings. But as an expert, you sometimes take a lot of things for granted and how people use their buildings. If you want to design an energy efficient or zero carbon or zero energy buildings, there are a lot of issues that actually function based on the user, how people use their buildings, especially if you focus on passive solutions. And passive solutions means you rely mainly on the wind and the sun and the other natural factors to heat or to cool or to ventilate your building, and of course to have solar access and natural daylight for your buildings. Because nowadays we are mainly rely on active systems like air conditioning systems. So we know that we can adjust the temperature and then everything will be solved. But for passive solutions, you need to interact with the natural forces around you, so you can adapt your building to the outside or external heat or external wind or external cold temperature. So again, with the building material, with the design solutions, and with the user's performance, user awareness. And here comes also part of what Dr. Heba mentioned, like when you put people in the equation and you understand their needs. When you design for people who are in informal areas, is different than people who are in big cities. When you design for people who are maybe close to agricultural land, is different than people who are close to industrial areas and so on. So you can help actually people to live even better if you can adjust the design solutions to the people needs and to their own actually preference. Someone live in an informal area had different preferences than someone living in like planned or formal neighborhood. We also interact with our buildings in different ways. And actually people in informal areas, many research work proved that they are more conscious and more aware of their surrounding climate compared to people who live in formal areas, because they don't have this extra luxurious facilities, and they try to find low-tech solutions and kind of adaptable solutions to adapt their indoor climate to the harsh climate conditions, either it's extreme cold or extreme hot, to be able to adapt quickly to this by adding different low-tech solutions, as Dr. Heba mentioned, like simple shading devices or like sprinkling water and so on. And we are lucky actually in Egypt that we have a climate that we can easily use passive solutions to adapt our buildings to this extreme climate by having like shallow geothermal earth pipes, or by having a proper orientation for our buildings and for shading, or for using evaporative cooling or cross ventilations. All of these kind of passive solutions can easily provide this sustainable, carbon neutral, climate adaptive, and also comfortable buildings for diverse type of users. We don't build for only one user. We should build for humanity. We have like common needs for comfort. Of course, we have different levels of comfort, but we have the main basic common need for comfort. So we need to design to have kind of equal. We treat people in a kind of a fair and equal way. Like you design for the poor, like you design for the rich.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marwan. That's so important that you're actually pointing out that we're actually designing for the humans and humanity. I think that sometimes we forget about this when we're just talking about the technicalities of it all. We have one quick follow-up question around this. Actually, somebody was wondering what would be the natural materials for Cairo. So when you're mentioning that you should be building with whatever is there, what would that be for the Cairo context?
If you're in an area with kind of the natural material around you is sand, so you build with sand. If it's agriculture area, you build with agriculture waste like straw or reeds, or sometimes it's possible to build with wood because we have palm trees and we have acacia trees and many other kind of wood. But of course, Egypt is not a country that we can use extensively wood, but in some cities in Egypt, it's possible to use wood. If you are close to the delta, you build with clay, but not the clay that we use for agriculture, because that is not advisable. So we have different kind of natural materials that we could use in Egypt. Mainly is this sand that is abundant in the desert. and not, of course, all type of sand, because some type of sand, you cannot like go to the beach and then bring some sand. You say like, okay, I can build with this sand. No, it is of course different type of sand. So yeah, there are plenty of those natural materials depending on where you are. Hassan Fathy said it nicely, build with whatever is under your feet. So this is a simple way to just look around, like what is there, and then this will be the material that suits best this climate. Of course, Egypt also had a history of building with a stone, like close to the Mediterranean. We have this abundance of a lot of stone. Also in Upper Egypt, we have stone. So it is depending on where are you, and then you can adapt this material to your use. And actually, also before and now, research has proved that when you use the material that is in your local climate, it is the most durable material that you could ever use, because it will resist properly the different climate conditions. If we are in a place where there's a lot of sandstorms, so the material that is available in this area would be able to resist sand erosion and all the problems that occur because of sand storms. If we are close to the waterfront, you get erosion from the salt, the air that is rich of salt because of the sea. So if you use the stone that is available in that place, it will be more resistant and more durable to build with.
Perfect, thank you so much. And Dr. Heba and Dr. Marwa have talked both about, you've both highlighted how it's important to look at bottom-up approaches. Now, Dr. Muhammad, maybe you can also tell us a little bit of the top-down approaches, as you're also working on the policy level. And I'm specifically interested, as Dr. Marwa has said, the building sector really needs to change. What kind of policies are there to incentivize different sectors to actually adapt, or what do you think needs to happen on the policy level?
I think on the policy level, I would feel a bit hesitant to speak on the policy while a representative of WEO does, Dr. Izzat, but I will try to give my input as just a consultant, not speaking on behalf of a government, of course. I mean, talking about international agreements, so by 2030, Egypt should have phased out polluting refrigerants, for example, to comply with the international obligations. By the year 2024, it's a year when Egypt will freeze the baseline consumption level and start the phasing down steps. These are all international agreements that we are obliged to follow and to respect, and we're actually working on that line. Cooperation between HPRC and other agencies, including the EWA, and that the use of refrigerants and moving from previously environmentally harmful one to a more environmental friendly ones. That is also on the policy level. On the building level, I think it's clear that what can apply on remote areas cannot be necessarily be useful for central areas. Talking about bottom-up, we had workshops on building techniques in Siwa, in Nuweiba, in Aswan, so all in remote areas, and we worked a lot with this natural material. And even the builders in these areas, they are quite aware of the conflict. If you go excessively using local material, that you might be harmful to the natural balance of ecosystem. For example, in Siwa, they used to use the palm trunks, the dead palm trunks in their ceilings. So when we try to reintroduce that as a building technique in Siwa, the local people objected because they said, okay, if you introduce that, we will be threatened by excessive cut of palms, even those which are still alive and active, because you force people to use it while we never historically used it unless they are dead. So there are some local traditions that are embedded that architects can sometimes look at as ideal solution, but local people, they know a bit more than us. from a top-down perspective, a policy perspective, I think the policy to be successful, it can only be done and based on proper dialogue with all stakeholders. And the stakeholders here meaning industry, end users, academia, even technicians, developers, banks. If you don't have that, if you miss just one link, you might have the whole system collapsing. And in the Cooler project, what we're trying to ensure is that all relevant and interested and beneficiary and affected partners are involved for that. We have our official kickoff for the project announced for the 6th of October, 2021. So it's an open invitation. We'll announce it by then. We would be glad to forward that to you, Lily, if you'd like to forward to the network. So everybody would be encouraged to contribute to that knowledge platform that would result ultimately in policy, technology, and financial reform for the cooling, only cooling. The CoolUp is only related to cooling, so it's not within the overall building sector. But parallel to that, we have also the websites on which you have the reports that we issue on the baseline information, the background information, the status quo. We consult all of our partners. We consult even survey companies to get us more of a robust, rooted material. Building, we have the GPRS, the Green Pyramid rating system. I think that needs to be simplified. We're working on that with our partners at HPRC on simplifying it and making it more accessible, linking that to banking and allowing people to get access to funds because of being environmentally consciously designing their places and building them. Not only that, but also codes for the material used, transportation, and so on. I think there is a lot to be done. This is why it's a 6 years project, and we're only working on one line. So the more people getting in and putting their opinion and really making clear their interest and their agenda and their contribution, the more successful the policy will, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I think it's really important that sometimes we tend to think that, you know, policies do have to come from top down, but then actually they need to be absolutely grounded and solid within actually the people who are affected by it and the people who are already working on it. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but it has been such a pleasure to discuss this with you. And I think it's become really, really clear that the solution lies within the people who are already living with the realities and who are adapting. And I've already loved the way that all of you actually put it, that the solutions are there because a lot of times when we don't have the luxury to just turn on the AC, that's when we really get the ideas for alternative strategies that are low tech, that are affordable, that are more sustainable. And maybe in the future, we're going to see all of you collaborate or somehow work together, which would of course be great. As far as I understand, Dr. Mohammed Salhin, the more input they can get, the happier they are. So I'm really looking forward to see how all of these sustainable building techniques are going to hopefully lead to less heat in the future and more bearable heat waves within the city. So thank you all so much for your input, and all of the attendees, thank you so much for your curiosity to coming today and listening. And we hope, of course, to see you after that summer break again, when we're going to continue with our event in October, talking on e-mobility, which also hopefully is going to cool down and increase the air quality within the city. So thank you so much, everyone.